Hello, I'm Earl Wajenberg, and this is Book Circle Presents The Cavalry Cycle, in which we examine life in the Dedicated Cavalry of Grand Normandy. If you know mythology much at all, you know that centaurs and wine do not mix well. Beer for my horses. We'll raise up our glasses against evil forces, singing whiskey for my men and beer for my horses. Toby Keith. So, lads, you must have known before you ever got here that we have a reputation problem and that it involves wine. So, here's the bad news. You should virtually never drink wine. Why? First, that reputation. If people see you drink wine, they are likely to become uneasy or alarmed. Second, they are right to be uneasy. It takes only a third the wine to get us drunk as it takes to get a human simple drunk. A little old lady can drink any of us under the table with wine. Only we won't slide under the table. We'll probably smash it. Third, wine makes us boisterous drunks. That's always bad. If we get angry into the bargain, it's much worse. And please bear in mind, it does not matter if you win the resulting fight or not. It will still be bad later on. Whatever else happens, we take another hit to our reputation. And by we, I mean all your brother stallions, even lads who haven't taken the Sagitta but will someday. Now the good news. It's just wine. Beer, whiskey, rum, vodka, they're all fine. But any grape wine, no, not even sauces made with wine or wine vinegar, if there's any alcohol left. And no port, no brandy. So, you can see there's something magical going on. There are fables about what. Beer and so on affect you normally. Subnormally, really. You now have greater tolerance than before. It all comes down to blood volume. When we changed, our blood volumes went up at least 5-fold. Wardley, you might be about 10-fold. So, if you like the taste of beer, that's unchanged. If you like the warm glow in your belly, that's unchanged too. It won't get as far as your horse belly. If you're after the relaxed feeling, it'll take you 5 or more times as much beer to get there, unless you can run on placebo effect. Many can. Fortunately, it also takes 5 or more times as much to get you really drunk. Do not try for it. Back to reputation. Be careful where you drink. Here in town, everyone knows about us and our real strengths and weaknesses. Old Irwin down at the Bow and Sabre is very pleased to see us coming because he knows our capacity and he knows not to serve us wine, and that we're not even supposed to ask. Everyone in the standard cavalry knows too. Elsewhere, unless you know they know that it's just about wine, don't drink in public. Order black coffee or something. Don't worry about being thought effete. You'd be amazed how seldom we are thought effete. Now, let's go back to my first lecture, the one about women. You shouldn't need to be told this, but if you encounter a woman who's got drunk, under any circumstances, do not so much as steal a kiss on her cheek. Reputation again, in spades. Keep your hands off. Going away should be high on your list of options. Or, if circumstances warrant, strongly consider stepping in to protect her from any unfair advances from others. I yearn for the day when we are thought of as knights in shining armor who just never dismount. Make your old captain happy. Now, you may have noticed there was nothing about wine in the oath you took just before you were changed. Wine is not absolutely forbidden. It can be taken in Holy Communion. It can be given medicinally. But the main reason is that it acts as elixir for us, restores magical energy. So, if you ever learn any magic, and if you are ever in a tight spot and running low on energy, it can be a lifesaver to be able to charge back up with a shot of wine. The catch is that expending your magical energy will not make you sober. Here's a story for you. I have no magic myself, but yes, Sanders? Nothing, sir, just swallowed wrong. But I was once on one of the expeditions looking for a Vanaheim passage. There were 4 of us from Dedicated. The expedition was stalked and attacked by a goblin tribe out in the marches, and our best weaponry was our mages' spells. Fortunately, one of them could move energy around, so all us non-mages chipped in our chi, that's what she called vis, to keep the mages going. After a bit, the human simple fighters were tapped out and could barely keep their eyes open. We would have been the same, but one mage was foresighted enough to have brought a couple of wineskins. One mouthful, and I'm wide awake again and able to donate more chi. I have to tell you, I only remember the first 3 or 4 rounds. I'm told it got harder and harder to convince us that we were most useful turning wine into chi, not charging the goblins. But we lived. That's it. Yes, you can drink, but don't get drunk. Don't drink wine for fun. Only drink it when someone who knows what they're doing tells you to. Dismissed. So, how did Grand Normandy come to have the dedicated cavalry? Lecture Hall and Pub, History Lesson. Part 1. Scene: the mess hall of the training center for the Grand Norman Dedicated Cavalry in Upham, Berkshire. The mess doubles as a lecture hall and presently contains 6 young centaurs listening to Captain Philip Fletcher. Behind him on the wall hangs a modern TV screen flanked by a photo of the royal family on one side and a print of a centaur in full military dress uniform on the other. We'll start with just an outline of the cavalry's history. It begins in the winter of 1943 in the Italian Alps. World War II was going on in the Mond Minor and giving the lie to minor for cryptic nations and the sundered world generally. Major troubles from the minor world. The tide of the war had turned, but there was still a long slog ahead and plenty of chances for reversals. The Alps were a busy place for the Mond Major. Der Ahnenerbe and its allies and satellites were active there, so its enemies were as well. Grand Normandy, along with several other cryptics, the men of Sherwood, Les Chevaliers de Charlemagne, and Geroldsek. Probably more, but those are the ones we know about. King Geoffrey led an expedition to the Alps with his 2 eldest sons, Princes Hugh and Oliver. It was a big force by cryptic standards of several hundred, given flit from Dymchurch to Casteralp by a Jossalfar troop. He was hoping to meet and make alliance with Desalon. This was an outzoned nation. We hadn't even heard of them until 1941. Apparently, the turbulence of war had reached even them. They had heard about it and were offering their services as mercenaries. This included their own centaur cavalry. That was interesting, because it had been centuries since any Grand Norman had seen a centaur, and all we had were others' reports. At the time, the assumption was that centaurs were a variety of fae with a strong animal theme. So we managed to rendezvous up in the Alps, and negotiations were proceeding when, without warning, the centaur cavalry attacked. They began laying into our people with guns and swords, but also with sagittae. In those moments, we learned the hard way that centaurs are not fays, but transformed men. Wardley, you never saw a transformation from the outside, did you? You were the first I shot in this class. Darnley, you were the last. You saw the other 5 change before you. Describe it, please, for Wardley and anyone else who was, shall we say, understandably preoccupied. Darnley. Well, sir, it was dramatic. The subject falls over like anyone shot in the chest with an arrow. Then he squirms and flops, not like he was trying to, more like something was pushing him around from inside. Looked painful, but of course it wasn't. And his torso stretches and swells, and I have to admit the idea of bursting rather preyed on my mind, but nobody did, not even Wardley. Laughter. As he starts to stretch, his arms split. A lower arm with just one finger stays put with the swelling lower body, while an arm like the original stays with the shoulders. I remember seeing the second rib cage form on Bryce. Somewhere in there a tail shows up, and he's been accumulating a coat all the while on the swelling lower body. Around the 4th or 5th shot, I think it was you, Carlin, I remember I watched the feet stretch out and the heels turn into hocks and the toes dwindle away, except for the one that swelled out into a hoof. Something similar must have happened to the arms in the middle, becoming forelegs, but it was hard to follow because it went very fast, and then you shot me, sir. He gestures down at his own equine legs. Very good. And it so happens that Dr. Blackholt recorded it all. He does all of them for study and research. Here, lads, are your first moments as centaurs. The TV lights up and plays. There is some nervous laughter and some exclamations of an aghast nature. Wardley. I see what you mean about bursting, Charlie Horse. Bryce. I see why you don't have the families in to see us until after, sir. Indeed. I show you this to try to convey the shock it must have been, but not an astonishment. Many of us knew pukas and headley cows and other shapeshifters, and all of us knew about them. Many had experience with seemings. There were benandanti among the troops. None got shot. We have to be happy for them, but it would have been interesting to see what a Sagitta did to a werewolf. And we were, after all, in the midst of a military encounter, even if we were negotiating for alliance, so we were quick to defend ourselves. After that surprise attack, Desalon quickly withdrew. I don't know how they'd tell the tale, but we say we routed them. We chased them through the Alps for a bit until they vanished into a sudden snow squall that must have hidden their passage out of zone. One of the survivors wrote a poem about it. I'll send it around if you like. Quite the imagery. Men pursuing the enemy on foot and horse, men throwing their souls after the enemy in wolf form, men staggering after, not knowing their own shape yet, only knowing they were still king's men. I must admit, I suspect poetic license about the fellows giving chase when fresh changed. We all remember how wobbly we were at first. But adrenaline is wonderful stuff, and the poet doesn't say they were at all fast. There are sober reports of men lying in the snow, new changed, kicking with new legs, fighting off enemy with saber, rifles, and bayonets. Very rousing stuff. But then came the shock of the butcher bill. King Geoffrey, dead by bullet. Elder Prince Oliver, the heir-elect, changed, then dead by spear, found with his saber in his hand. That left Prince Hugh, the younger one. Well, that was the end of the expedition, of course. Now it was a matter of limping back to Castleralp. We did, but we took along as many Sagittae as we could find. As we limped, we learned about our transformed brothers, and Grand Normandy's first centaurs learned about themselves. They learned, on the whole, what you've learned. So the men who were now also horses and the men who were still simple could trust one another. And as we limped, we had to start coping with a succession crisis right there in the Alps. The king and the heir-elect were dead. Now we have to get into some of the politics of the period. As is often the case, there were liberal and conservative forces contending. The liberals were led by the Baudry family, same as the prime minister. It was his grandfather at the head of the family then. They wanted to end the requirement for a waiver from the lords when a noble house wanted to depart from strict male primogeniture. They wanted to relax the religious requirements for appointive offices from some recognized form of Catholic to some recognized form of Christian, and some added Jews in too. They wanted to move some local offices from appointive to elective. The most famous point was that they wanted to form a parliament. The conservatives were led by the Obrio family. Basically, they opposed those changes. The most conservative, though not Obrio, wanted to roll back religious requirements to Roman Avenese or Orthodox Catholics only and leave out the Western and Celtic. But I don't think they ever seriously expected to win that one. Now, in his day, His late Majesty had been what we would now call a moderate liberal. But that was in his day. In fact, he got the religion list expanded to any Catholic and made the waivers for primogeniture easier, especially for female heirs. But that was as far as he wanted to go, or perhaps as far as he felt he could go. Oliver, the heir-elect, was a moderate liberal for his day and backed the liberal agenda, or most of it. But he was also a good diplomat and negotiator and made the Obrios and other conservatives comfortable, or comfortable enough. They felt he wouldn't go too fast or too far and would be glad of imaginative compromises to make everyone happy as far as possible. But now they were both dead. The heir presumptive, but not elect, was Prince Hugh. He was rather young to be much of a political factor, but such as he was, he supported his father. maybe out of filial loyalty more than considered opinion, but we'll get to that later. So, there they are, trudging through the winter Alps with the body of their king and the bizarrely mutated body of their prince, trying to keep the succession going and the kingdom alive, worrying about meeting Desalon in their weakened state, while they fight the winter and their wounds and often their own new shapes. It's at times like this that nations die, you know, especially little ones like us cryptics. Valkyrstein went that way by succession crisis around 1900, and you're all old enough to remember how it almost happened to Micklemont. And the trouble would still be waiting for them at home. The captains sent Benandante runners ahead in dream to alert Grand Normandy to gather the lords for an election as soon as possible, and to see if anyone could find fays or something else that would get them home faster than a trek to Castleralp. They did. They Filles de la Manche, the Channel fays, raised a raid and came for us, took us to Castleralp. They nearly ran afoul of the Earl King's hunt on the way in, with an even closer thing on the way out with us in tow. And there was almost a lethal misunderstanding when they descended on a surprised Castleralp. But they returned for us. They returned. He pauses. The pause extends microscopically until the class picks up their cue and replies in a slightly mumbly chorus, "And we return." They kept faith, and so do we, clearer this time. Soon, the thriving family and the nobles were all met at Le Vignoble, and the politicking really started. Baudry and the Liberals wanted Queen Ruth, while Aubriot and the Conservatives backed Prince Hugh. The negotiating was all very rushed and confused, by all accounts. It was, of course, very urgent to pick a monarch, but there was another issue arguably more urgent. We had just lost king and heir to Desalon, a new enemy, largely unknown. This enemy had to be investigated, defended against, and if possible, punished as soon as possible. Hugh proposed a joint monarchy of him and his mother until after we settled the Centaur issue, and the Queen agreed, but the nobles did not. They refused the joint monarchy. They refused Princess Helene, the eldest child of Ruth and Geoffrey, who took a compromise position. The Queen and Prince kept summoning the nobles to meetings, but nothing got settled. Abruptly, Prince Hugh settled it. The TV lights up again, showing a black and white image of the front of Le Vignoble de Guillaume, which has a large terrace suitable for making public announcements. Before the terrace are gathered a crowd of men and women in formal clothes of the 1940s. It is winter. Snow lies on the roofs and trees. The people are in heavy coats. Standing at attention in front of the terrace are 4 centaurs. 3 wear military dress jackets, gray in the image, but the viewers know they must be bright red, like the ones they sometimes wear. Of the 3, 2 wear peaked caps, round flat-topped short-billed caps worn in many militaries. They are infantry. The 3rd wears a cowboy-style Stetson, cavalry. These hats would have been bright blue. The 4th centaur wears a plain jacket that the audience knows would have been gray, a close-fitting cowl, and half a cape thrown over the left shoulder, marking him as a soldier monk of the Order of St. Martin. The barrels of their equine bodies wear horse blankets bearing the Grand Norman coat of arms. The terrace itself has flags and bunting draped over the railing so that the people behind are visible only from the waist up. They are the royal family and their close court. At the center are Queen Ruth and Prince Hugh. The prince stands almost 2 feet taller than his mother, as if on a soapbox. He wears dress military jacket and hat. Everyone on the terrace looks serious, or taxidermied. In the muffled acoustics of 1940s newsreels, the prince says, "As you see, there are now centaurs in Grand Normandy. These men are casualties of Desalon's treacherous attack on our negotiating party, which took the lives of my father and brother. These casualties, in cooperation with the realm's best mages and scientists, have shown us the power of centaurs such as those who attacked them, their speed, strength, and sureness. We are still ignorant of the origin and fuller motives of these enemies. We do not yet know how to find them. We do not even know if Desalon attacked for reasons of its own or on behalf of Deranenarbe. We only know they assaulted us in a new way which we must meet. We are meeting this threat with a new branch of our military, the Dedicated Cavalry of Grand Normandy. This project has our full support, and we join in it wholeheartedly, as you will see." Prince Hugh then comes off the terrace and shows himself in full. He is now a centaur, the original of the print portrait hanging to the side of the TV. He comes around to stand before the row of 4 other centaurs. With military precision, the 5 salute the crowd. The image freezes, then goes out. The prince had disappeared from the scene for 2 days. The whole royal family and court became very hard to find and tight-lipped. The arguments about succession stormed on even more chaotically, but the royals in the court didn't even seem interested. Then Prince Hugh did this, shows up on hooves and announces the creation of the Dedicated Cavalry. Then he announces that he fully supports his mother as successor to his father. She announces she accepts his support. And in 2 more days, Queen Ruth is no longer just the widowed consort, but the crowned and queen regnant. And Grand Normandy is ready to re-enter the Monde Major and the war again. The Obrios or the Conservatives were furious at first, but the Queen was anxious to prosecute the war, not interested in pursuing the liberal agenda. The Baudrys and other liberal leaders themselves dropped politics for the war effort, especially the Dedicated Cavalry. 3 younger Baudry sons volunteered for transformation, and all the males of the Fitzmichael family, even though it ended their male line. There was a problem, though. If we wanted to continue growing the cavalry, we were doing our transformations using sagittae we took from the battlefield. We had no idea how to make our own. So one Dr. Blackholt, great uncle to our Dr. Blackholt, took on the project of reverse engineering the sagittae, figuring out how they were made. In the end, he transformed himself, stabbing himself in the shoulder with a sagitta, and analyzed the spell for all he was worth in the few seconds of the transformation. But he did it. Making a sagitta is a slow process and expensive in terms of magical energy, which all has to come from one person, our Dr. Blackholt tells me. So that's why we only have a handful of sagittae every year. That's with Blackholt and his niece and nephew working on it. However, the rate of volunteers is rather low after that initial burst at the founding, so we usually have some in store. The Alps attack and the fruitless search for Desalon rather took the luster off our war effort, but Grand Normandy did its part, and there were a few times when the new Dedicated Cavalry also played a part, though we had to spend a lot of time figuring out what we were good for, and more time looking for those Desalon centaurs. Prince Hugh was already married when he transformed to Princess Eleanor, and had a son, Robert, who was elected when Queen Ruth came to abdicate and retire. This Robert is, of course, King Stephen's father, His Majesty Emeritus. So our king is the grandson of a centaur, in a manner of speaking, though of course his grandfather was transformed after his father was born. And that's our beginning in short outline. Questions? Yes, Fells? Fells. Why did we risk both the king and the heir in one military expedition, sir? And why wasn't there an elect in waiting? Good questions. I've given this talk many times, of course, so I might even say they're classic questions. The answer is that most of the time they were not on the same expedition. We had only a general idea of where to meet Desalon. At Castleralp, the party split into 3 groups, one led by the king, one by Prince Oliver, and one by General Lord Fitzsimmons, accompanied by Prince Hugh. Each was to inform the others by dream courier when they found Desalon. Fitzsimmons, by the way, was transformed in the attack and eventually became the first Marshal General of Dedicated Cavalry. As for the elect in waiting, first, it's not usually necessary to have an elect in waiting. It's rare to lose both king and heir at a stroke, but that's surprise attacks for you. Second, politics again. It had been hard enough to pick an heir elect. They hadn't been able to settle on an elect in waiting, and it hadn't seemed urgent. Yes, Carlin? Carlin. We know they were planning an attack all along. If they weren't, what made them attack? Another good one. No, we do not know that. It may all have been a tragic misunderstanding. You may be sure they started debriefing everyone as soon as possible. Someone quoted Fitzsimmons as saying, "I want to know why I'm marching back on twice as many legs as I set out with." It may be that it was the Desalon centaurs that started the attack against the will of their human simple comrades. There are several reports of Decilon's soldiers urging Centaurs back or trying to hinder them, and yelling Oshi, which would be close to no in Greek, and the Decilonians seem to have spoken a Greek-like language. But then too many blows were exchanged and battle was joined. And we'll continue with Fletcher's lecture and the history of the Grand Norman Cavalry next time.